like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you dare to step into the darkest corners of the justice system, because once you hear this story, you won't see prisons the same way again. The alarm screamed through Borgo Prison at 2:17 a.m., not the routine buzzer inmates ignored in their sleep, but the kind that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Red lights strobed across concrete walls soaked with decades of sweat, rust, and despair. Guards ran, boots slamming against the narrow walkways, radios crackling with overlapping voices that all carried the same word. Down. Cell block D was down. When officers finally forced open cell D14, the smell hit them first, coppery, sour, unmistakable. An inmate lay motionless on the concrete floor, his thin blanket twisted around his legs. His face was gray, lips cracked, eyes half open and staring at nothing. The metal food tray beside him was untouched, a lump of congealed porridge hardened like cement. He had been dead for hours. Within minutes, the prison went into total lockdown. No movement, no meals, no showers, just silence, broken only by distant coughing, muffled shouts, and the echo of chains tightening as doors sealed shut. Borgo Prison, already infamous for its brutal conditions, had crossed a line that even its own staff feared. By sunrise, rumors were already spreading beyond the prison walls. Some said the inmate had starved, others whispered poisoning. A few guards quietly admitted something worse. This wasn't the first body, just the first one no one could hide. Borgo Prison sat on the edge of the city like a concrete scar, massive and decaying, designed to hold 3,000 inmates but crammed with nearly twice that number. It was known for riots, corruption, and a food system so broken it had become a form of punishment all its own. Here, meals weren't about nutrition, they were about control. The dead man's name was Luca Ferraro, 34 years old, serving a 7-year sentence for armed robbery. No history of violence inside, no gang affiliation, no enemies anyone knew about, just another number in an overcrowded system, until his death forced Borgo into the spotlight. Detective Mara DeLuca arrived before noon, her coat pulled tight against the cold air that always seemed to cling to the prison grounds. She had investigated murders, disappearances, and organized crime cases across the region, but Borgo was different. Everyone knew cases connected to the prison had a way of collapsing under administrative errors and missing files. As she passed through the first security gate, she noticed the inmates lined along the cell doors, eyes watching through narrow slots. Hungry eyes, angry eyes, some banged softly on metal, not loud enough to trigger punishment, but just enough to be heard. "They haven't eaten since last night," a junior guard muttered under his breath as he scanned her credentials. "They're saying it's because of the investigation." DeLuca didn't respond. She already knew the truth. Lockdowns were convenient excuses. Food deliveries were delayed, portions were cut, and sometimes, meals simply disappeared. Inside cell block D, the air was thick and stale. Luca's cell had been sealed, marked with evidence tape that looked absurdly fragile against the grime. Recently, that word echoed as DeLuca stepped into the prison kitchen hours later. The place looked like a factory abandoned mid-operation. Industrial-sized pots coated with residue, floors slick with grease. A sour smell that made her stomach tighten. A kitchen worker, an inmate with sunken cheeks and shaking hands, stared at her as if she were a ghost. His jumpsuit hung loose, as though it belonged to someone else. "How long have portions been like this?" DeLuca asked him gently. He glanced toward the guard by the door before whispering, "They cut them months ago." Then again, "Some days the food doesn't come at all." "Why?" "Budget problems," he said with a bitter laugh. That's what they say. DeLuca had heard that excuse too many times. Budget problems never explained why certain officials drove luxury cars or why food suppliers kept winning contracts despite repeated complaints. As the day wore on, the investigation hit invisible walls. Surveillance footage from cell block D was missing. Kitchen delivery logs had gaps. Medical reports contradicted one another. Every answer raised to more questions. As evening fell, Borgo Prison was a powder keg waiting for a spark. You could hear it in the air, a low hum of pure desperation. Inmates, pushed to the edge by hunger, began to pound on their cell doors, a rhythmic, angry thunder echoing through the concrete halls. Guards stood ready, their knuckles white around their batons, sweat dripping from their brows. This wasn't just unrest, it was the sound of humanity fraying at the seams. Hunger makes men do things they wouldn't normally do, and inside these walls, desperation was turning deadly. Just before the clock struck midnight, a call came through that chilled investigator DeLuca to the bone. It happened again. Another inmate had collapsed, but this time, it wasn't from cell block D, it was block B, a completely separate wing of the prison. This new development shattered the idea of an isolated incident. The inmate was alive, but just barely. As medics rushed him down the corridor, his body shook with violent convulsions. Before he lost consciousness, he managed to force out a few slurred words, but their meaning was terrifyingly clear: the food. It's killing us. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. News channels blared headlines about inhumane conditions, starvation, and a rot of corruption within the prison system. The public was outraged. Politicians, sensing the shift in public opinion, promised full-scale investigations and accountability. Prison officials, of course, went on the defensive, issuing firm denials and calling the accusations baseless. But while the world outside debated, something far more sinister was quietly unfolding within the prison walls. DeLuca knew the public statements were a smokescreen. The real truth was buried deep inside Borgo, and she had to find it. She arranged a secret meeting with an internal auditor, a man so scared he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He agreed to speak, but only off the record, away from any listening ears. In a small, sterile office, he slid a thin folder across the table, his hands trembling so badly the papers rustled. "These are the supplier invoices," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They show food shipments that were paid for in full but never actually delivered. Or, if they were delivered, the quantities were a fraction of what the paperwork claimed. This was it." "The proof? Who approved these?" DeLuca asked, her eyes locked on the documents. The auditor took a shaky breath, swallowing hard. "Senior administration," he said, then leaned in closer. "And someone on the outside." He was about to say more, to reveal the final piece of the puzzle, but a sharp, authoritative knock on the door cut him short. A guard stood there, his expression unreadable. The meeting was over. The auditor snatched the folder back so quickly it was as if it had never been there at all, leaving DeLuca with more questions than answers. The allegation was damning: intentional deprivation. The official response, stamped in red ink, was even simpler: denied. But it was a small, handwritten note at the bottom of the page that made her heart stop. Scrawled in pen, almost an afterthought, were 3 words: transfer request pending. He was trying to get out. It was a machine, a system designed to crush anyone who got too close to its dark secrets. Looking out over the prison yard, at the shadowy figures of inmates shuffling under the cold gaze of armed guards, a terrifying thought became crystal clear. Luca Ferraro didn't die from an accident or neglect. He was silenced. Because the next morning, when DeLuca finally gained access to a locked, forgotten storage room tucked away beneath the prison kitchen, what she found inside would change everything. The case was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The city breathes secrets. Most of them are harmless, whispers lost in the wind. But some have teeth. My name is Mara DeLuca. I'm an investigative journalist, and for the past 6 months, one secret has had its teeth in me. It started with a name, Tomas Ionescu, a face in a crowd of forgotten files. 25 years old, but his eyes held the weight of a century. He was frail, hollowed out by a system that was supposed to care for him, but instead, it consumed him. Tomas wasn't a criminal, he was sick, but he ended up in a place where sickness is a weakness to be exploited. His official file was thin, the cause of death listed as complications from pre-existing conditions. But the truth is never that simple. The truth is a tangled mess of whispers and shadows, and to untangle it, you have to go into the dark. My investigation led me to the Blackwood Correctional Facility, a place spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. It's a fortress of concrete and silence. My source was inside, a man named Adrian Kovacs. He was serving a long sentence, but his mind was sharp, his eyes burning with a defiant fire that even years of confinement couldn't extinguish. He saw what was happening. He described the neglect, the quiet cruelty that thrived in the shadows of the prison walls. He talked about the medical wing, a place where men went to get better and often never returned. He told me about the fear, a constant, low hum that vibrated through the very bars of the cells. Men like Tomas, and another he mentioned, Miguel Santos, were just a few of the many who were sick, dehydrated, and terrified. They were ghosts long before they died. Adrian spoke of a system that wasn't just broken. It was predatory. Resources meant for inmate care vanished. Medical supplies were sold on the black market. Pleas for help were met with indifference or punishment. The guards, the administration. They had built an empire on the suffering of the powerless. Tomas Ionescu wasn't just a victim of illness, he was a casualty of calculated neglect. His frail body was the evidence, his silent passing the perfect crime. He knew the risk. In a place like Blackwood, silence is survival. This is more than just one man's story. Tomas Ionescu is a symbol of a deep, dark rot. My work isn't about vengeance. It's about dragging these secrets, kicking and screaming, into the light. The people who did this, they count on us to look away. They count on the world to forget the names and faces of men like Tomas and Miguel. My job is to make sure that doesn't happen. The investigation is far from over, and the deeper I dig, the more dangerous it becomes. But their story deserves to be told. The truth demands it. Thanks for watching. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, subscribe to follow the investigation. Mara DeLuca wasn't your typical investigator. She didn't just look at files, she looked at faces. And the faces she saw at Borgo Prison were haunted, skeletal. The official story was budget cuts, but Mara knew something was deeply wrong. The numbers didn't add up. She started digging, late nights fueled by cheap coffee and a burning sense of injustice. That's when she found it. A ghost company, a fake food supplier, gourmet provisions, that had been billing the state for millions. Millions for food that never arrived. The inmates weren't on a diet. They were being systematically starved. She typed up her report, every detail meticulously documented. The shell corporations, the phantom invoices, the offshore accounts. This was it. This was the smoking gun that would blow the whole conspiracy wide open. She handed it to her supervisor, expecting a commendation, a task force, something. Instead, she got a pat on the shoulder and a concerned look. Mara, this is bigger than you think, he said. For your own safety, I'm taking you off the case. Her safety? What about the safety of the men wasting away in their cells? She was furious, but her hands were tied. She was officially sidelined. A week later, the archives went up in flames. A freak electrical fire, they called it. The fire just so happened to destroy the entire wing where the Borgo Prison procurement records were stored. All of Mara's evidence, every paper trail she had painstakingly gathered, turned to ash. Coincidence? Mara didn't believe in coincidences. She knew it was a message. They were erasing their tracks, and they were warning her to back off. She felt a cold dread creep over her. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power, and the people who wielded it were ruthless. News from inside Borgo turned grim. The budget cuts had become even more severe. Rations were slashed again. Then, the inevitable happened. An inmate, a young man named Rico, died. The official cause was a pre-existing condition, but everyone knew the truth. He starved to death. His name became a whisper in the halls, a symbol of the rot that had taken hold. Mara felt a crushing weight of guilt. She had the evidence. she could have saved him. Now, his death was on her hands, and the people responsible were walking free, richer than ever. The fight had become personal. She couldn't let Rico's death be in vain. She started digging again, but this time, she was off the books, working in the shadows. She was no longer just an investigator. She was a target. They knew she wouldn't stop. One evening, an unmarked envelope slid under her apartment door. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a close-up of a list, a ledger of some kind. It was titled Borgo Special Accounts. Most of it was redacted, but near the bottom, one line was circled in red. It was a name, followed by a chilling directive. The name was Mara DeLuca. The directive: reduced rations. They weren't just trying to silence her anymore. They were coming for her. The game had changed, and now she wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her life. What happens next? You'll have to subscribe to find out. Thanks for watching. The last meal, Mara DeLuca didn't sleep that night. The image burned into her mind, the scorched clipboard, the crude handwriting, her name circled like a target. Borgo Prison wasn't just a crime scene anymore. It was a machine designed to punish anyone who threatened its silence. By dawn, she made her decision. If the system wouldn't let her finish the investigation, she would dismantle it from the outside. She began with the one person Borgo couldn't erase, Adrian Kovacs. Kovacs had been transferred hours before the kitchen fire, moved to a regional holding facility under the excuse of protective relocation. DeLuca knew better. Transfers were how Borgo buried problems without bodies. She drove 3 hours through freezing rain to reach him. When Kovacs was brought into the interview room, DeLuca barely recognized him. His uniform hung loose on his frame, his cheeks were hollow, his skin pale and tight over bone. But his eyes, sharp, alert, still carried defiance. "They told me you were gone," he said quietly. "I was," DeLuca replied. "Now I'm back." Kovacs leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Then listen carefully, because Borgo isn't about food. Food is just the leash." He explained how the ration system really worked. Certain inmates were labeled non-compliant. Anyone who filed grievances, refused bribes, or knew too much. Their meals were altered, less volume, more filler, substances that weakened them slowly. Not enough to kill quickly, enough to break them. "Starving men don't organize," Kovacs said. "They don't fight back. They don't testify." "Who decided?" DeLuca asked. Kovacs hesitated. "The orders didn't come from guards. They came from above. Meetings in the warden's office, men in suits. No names, no badges." He slid something across the table. "A folded piece of paper. I hid this," he said, "in my shoe." They missed it. It was a menu. Not the one inmates received, but the one served in the staff dining room. Fresh meat, vegetables, bread, real portions, real nutrition. At the bottom was a signature authorizing food distribution. Warden Elias Richter. DeLuca felt a surge of cold fury. Richter had testified publicly just weeks earlier, blaming budget cuts and supply issues. He had looked into cameras and lied without blinking. By the time she returned home, her phone was buzzing nonstop. An anonymous email had gone viral. Attached were photos, documents, procurement records, medical reports, and the staff menu. Someone had leaked everything. News outlets exploded. Advocacy groups demanded answers. International watchdogs called for immediate intervention. Borgo Prison, once a shadowy institution few spoke about, was suddenly under a blinding spotlight. Richter went silent. Then he disappeared. Authorities claimed he had taken medical leave. DeLuca knew that was code. Men like Richter didn't vanish without protection. The breakthrough came 3 days later. A sanitation worker from Borgo came forward, terrified, shaking, but ready to talk. He had watched trucks arrive late at night, unloading unmarked crates. Not food, chemicals, industrial binders. Nutrient substitutes meant for livestock. "They told us it was cheaper," he said no one would notice. "Have you ever heard of Borgo Prison? It's a place shrouded in mystery and some pretty wild stories. Officially, it's known for being one of the toughest prisons in Corsica, housing some of France's most notorious criminals. But dive a little deeper, and you'll find whispers of something far more bizarre. The story goes that back in the early 2000s, things at Borgo started getting strange. It began with inmates reporting unsettling dreams, all sharing similar, eerie details. They'd dream of forgotten tunnels beneath the prison, ancient symbols carved into the stone, and a strange, humming sound that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Guards dismissed it as prison psychosis, a common side effect of long-term incarceration. But then, the guards started experiencing it too. They'd hear faint whispers in empty cell blocks and see fleeting shadows in their peripheral vision. Some even claimed to find strange, non-human footprints in dusty, unused corridors. The official explanation was faulty wiring and overactive imaginations, but not everyone was convinced. Then came the excavation. Officially, it was a project to reinforce the prison's aging foundations. But according to some former staff, what they found was anything but ordinary. They allegedly uncovered a section of the foundation that was far older than the rest of the prison, built with an unknown, incredibly dense black stone that modern tools could barely scratch. The weirdest part, the strange humming sound reported by the inmates was supposedly loudest around this ancient structure. The project was abruptly halted. The official reason was budget cuts. But the rumors say the area was secretly sealed off, and all personnel involved were made to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. What was really down there? Some speculate it was an ancient tomb, others a forgotten piece of technology. Today, Borgo Prison still operates, but the stories persist. Are they just tall tales cooked up in the isolation of prison life? Or did the authorities stumble upon something so strange, so unexplainable, that they decided the only solution was to bury it and pretend it never happened? We may never know the full truth, but it makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden right beneath our feet. What do you think is going on at Borgo Prison? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the unknown.